My name is Deborah Potter, and I'm a class of 72 graduate of North Carolina. And today we have, I think, a really interesting panel, and we'll have, I hope, a really interesting discussion. I want to let you know from the get-go that we will leave quite a bit of time for questions at the end. We have one panelist joining us, well, as you see now, on Zoom. In order for her to hear, we have to use microphones. So when we get to the questions, please watch for the running people who will have a microphone and bring it to you so that you can hear you and possibly respond if the question's for her. You may have noticed that Carolina has been in the news lately, and not all of it for that amazing run in the NCAA tournament, which was fantastic. But some of the news lately has been a little troubling. Last week, a national organization of university faculty issued a report describing political interference in the UNC system and what it called a pattern of institutional racism. The AAUP report cited controversies over the handling of Silent Sam and the tenure case of Nicole Hannah-Jones. It pointed to leadership that is mostly white and mostly male. And it said the system is starting to lose talented faculty and staff of color. While the UNC system is implementing the recommendations of a racial equity task force, which completed its work 18 months ago, the AAUP report said, and I quote, "Any steps they may currently be taking to address institutional racism are falling woefully short." So what has changed in the 50-plus years since we were students here? Does academic freedom mean that everyone can express their views and be listened to with respect? Is the climate on campus more diverse and inclusive? And what do we mean by those terms anyway? We'll talk about that this morning with this panel, and I want to introduce them to you. Sitting first in the line here next to me is Ben Boykin. He's a 5-term member and former chair of the Westchester County Board of Legislators in New York. He has his own financial firm. He previously held executive financial positions at RJR Nabisco. While a student at Carolina, Ben helped to found the Black Student Movement, and he's now on the Alumni Association board. And I should say he's a 72 graduate. Jean Kitchin is currently hosting and producing television shows and video projects, continuing a 40-year career in the field. From 1998 to 2014, she had a really different kind of job. She was head of a pharmacy chain. She served on the UNC Board of Trustees for 8 years, including 2 years as vice chair, and she's also served as chair of the Alumni Association. Leah Cox is vice provost for equity and inclusion and UNC's chief diversity officer. She came to Carolina last year from a similar position at Towson University in Maryland. Leah has created innovative programs and initiatives in this area. She's designed and led a variety of student success and diversity, equity, and inclusion training programs, so she's an expert. Pat Reighard is Professor Emeritus of Communication at Appalachian State University. While a student at Carolina, Pat was on the wrestling team. He played French horn in the UNC Symphony Orchestra. He has an MA in clinical psychology and a PhD in radio, TV, film. He has written, produced, and directed many award-winning films and videos. Joining us on Zoom, the always present Zoom for the last 2 years, is Veggie Sati. She has her undergraduate degree and PhD from Carolina. She teaches in the psych department and is director, among other things, director of the Townsend Program for Education Research. Veggie is a national expert on inclusive teaching and the recipient of numerous teaching awards. She wants you to know she was born in India but raised in a small town in North Carolina and is a big believer in public education. So thank you all for being here. And let's kick off this conversation by getting to a definition, if we can. In your opinion, in your view, what do these terms diversity, equity, inclusion mean to you? And we'll just go round robin and see what we get. Ben, what do they mean to you?
Okay, thank you. I think that when I think about inclusion, I'm thinking about we must embrace those who are different from us. They look different, they act different, they think different, they may be physically challenged, they may be mentally challenged, they may have different sexual orientation. So we must embrace all of them and make them feel that they are part of a place where they can belong. And when I talk about diversity, again, I think about that as a term also inclusive, but also diversity is people who are African American, who are Asian, who are Hispanic, who are white. In other words, we need to bring them all together. I'll stop there.
Okay, good. Jean, what are your thoughts?
And I'm using my phone. My printer died last night yesterday when I was trying to print this out. Very similarly to Ben, with diversity, everyone's included, every gender, race, ethnicity. Just view us all as the same to start with. And the more different, well, diversity just means within every panel, within everyone's included and in a diverse population. Inclusion, everyone gets to contribute. I did a lot of reading in preparation for this about inclusion, and I think that's one of the areas, Deborah, that I really feel like I got a lot of input on students who don't feel like they can contribute their views on things because there's more of a slant toward liberalism here, and some of the students feel like if they speak out with conservative views that they will be shut down. And so I feel very strongly that people need to feel like everybody's view matters, and that we need all views. We need, if there's a radical on one side, we need a radical on the other so they can hear all views. And if there's any place that I think we need to teach them civil discourse and to be able to share ideas and not have any negative pushback, but to be heard and to be politely taught to debate and compromise and really listen respectfully. This is, if not here, where?
Okay. Leah, this is your job. How would you define these terms?
I have no idea what diversity is. Just kidding. So when we're thinking about higher education and being here at an institution of learning, when I think about diversity, mostly and most of the time, folks are talking about numbers. How many folks of what group are here at Carolina? So whether it's race, religion, gender, sexual orientation, all of those, ability, disability, we're thinking about numbers. How many folks are here? What we need to think more about, and we know that the diversity here at Carolina could grow, is about inclusion and equity, right? So making folks feel as if they're part of this campus, of this community, making sure that they're included in every aspect of the institution as possible, whether that's students, faculty, or staff. So all of us are here, but then equitable treatment. How are we being paid? How are we being hired? How are we being recruited? And are the policies and procedures equitable? But lastly, what I push to focus on is belonging, right? So it's DEIB. And do folks feel as if they belong here at Carolina, right? So it's one thing to feel like, okay, I'm here. But if you don't feel as if you should be here, then we've missed the mission, right? So it's about diversity, inclusion, equity, and belonging.
Thank you. Pat?
I have been trying to find a lot of definitions for diversity, equity, inclusion. Did not look up belonging. And there are quite a few variations on defining those things. What I find is that they are hard to measure, and I would think that our goal is to be a place, this university, that is diverse, that is inclusive, and that there is equity here. My question is, how will we know when we get there? We have the goal of always increasing. We want more. How will we know when we get there? Is there a university that we can look at? We can say, yes, they have achieved diversity, inclusion, equity, belonging. That's my question.
It's always a good one when you talk about numbers as how do you measure success, right? So, Veggie, you're also an expert in this area. You have been working in the area of, education research. Is there an answer? First of all, how would you define the terms? But also, is there an answer to Pat? How do you know when you've succeeded? You may be muted on your Zoom.
I'll try again. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay. Well, thank you, and thank you for accommodating me on Zoom. Yes, I would argue that, especially as a person whose focus is on measurement, that many things can be measured, even the things that we think are really hard to measure. We may not do it very well, but we can always attempt to do it. And thinking about diversity, equity, and inclusion and belonging, I agree with what everybody has said. I think the only thing I would add is that sometimes we think of diversity as sort of attributes or labels for a person, and we know that they are really rich. So when I ask, for example, participants in workshops to think about how they might characterize themselves, we see things like they might be race, they might be gender, but there are things like I'm a mother, I'm an introvert. There are so many aspects of our lives that color the way we interact with others. And those are to be celebrated and actually enrich, especially the classroom experience. So we know that diversity is important and an aspect of a benefit in educational settings. And we want to make sure that people feel included. And that's when people feel welcome, valued, safe to contribute. The remarks about being comfortable to be able to share one's viewpoint is really important, especially in a college classroom. This is where we teach the skills to be able to have difficult conversations with one another respectfully, and to understand people's viewpoints. We may not agree with them, but we can still have conversations about what people feel and why they feel that way. And lastly, equity is really thinking about not just access, but thinking through our systems. Where are there barriers for people, and how do we remove those barriers so that more people can succeed, especially when we think about an educational setting where we bring people in to succeed. So we must do everything in our powers to help them be able to do that, and not put any barriers in their way. So this is an ongoing process. I don't know that any one campus has done it extremely well. We're all learning, but I think some of us lead in some areas, and I see Carolina especially as a leader in terms of thinking about, in my case, inclusive teaching, and thinking about how we begin to measure equity in the classroom.
Great, thank you. Let's put our minds back 50 years, if we can. And I know, who remembers, right? But there are some things we probably remember about being on campus 50 years plus ago. What was the atmosphere then? How would you describe what you found at Carolina in terms of diversity and all those other things, equity, inclusion, sense of belonging? Let's go back 50 years. What do we remember from that time?
Deborah, I'll jump in. In fact, Pat and I were talking about it the other day. People, when they disagreed, they weren't disagreeable as much as I see young people today. I mean, I never felt like I couldn't give my opinion on something and have anybody want to shut me down or have anybody say, you're wrong. And I see and hear a lot of that. Of course, a lot of it's on media, but I also in some of the papers that I read about students reporting on things that happen, I feel like there's a different climate in America now than there used to be. But we had protests in the Vietnam War, and, Pat reminded me of one day class was shut down because people were protesting, and everybody seemed to listen to others, and it was I give the example of Ted Kennedy and Jesse Helms. Back in our time, they were polarized in their thoughts, but they worked together, and they respected each other, and they were friends. And I think a lot of that civility is gone now, but we certainly had it then. At least that's my experience.
But Ben, what do you remember?
Yes, I started here, obviously, August of '68. Vietnam, social unrest. Remember the '68 Chicago Convention. Remember the assassination of Martin Luther King, assassination of Bobby Kennedy. That was the backdrop when I came from Eastern North Carolina to here. My RA, and there are very few people on campus that look like me and the three others of us that's out here, okay, in 1968. My RA used to say to me, why are you here? Why aren't you at Central? Why aren't you at A&T? I said, well, I'm here and I'm going to stay. But also, we could have discourse. We could disagree, but we were, as I said, not disagreeable. There was a tremendous amount of social unrest. Remember, we, the members of the Black Student Movement, helped close down the Little Hall in 1969 so that black women could get a pay raise. We were way ahead of the curve and the time, equal pay for all. So when you think about what we have done at UNC over the last 50-some years, we have been really leaders in so many facets and all.
Pat, you want to add anything from your 50-year perspective? I'm not going to ask the two academics, obviously.
In my perspective, I came from the West, and if I had hair like this, I'd gotten kicked out of high school. Literally. I could not go to school like this. So when I got on campus, I saw this figure in white court, had really long hair, and turned around and it was a guy. Oh my gosh. I mean, Carolina was a great experience for me because there was so much going on, and we could talk about things, and we did learn a lot about different viewpoints, and so it was great for me. Now, we did have political influence. Speaker band, you heard of that. I was in Joyner, and we had the Duke Parade. We built a float, and it was an outhouse, and it said, "Go to Helms, Duke." Remember Jesse Helms, WRAL, and railing against Whiskey Hill and the Pinko commies over at Carolina.
Blacks.
So that was what I was experiencing. It was wonderful. I loved it.
And you did feel like you belonged.
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah?
yeah.
Okay. All of you?
I never thought in any class or among any of my peers that if I gave my opinion on something that I would be treated, disrespectfully.
Okay.
And that skill set that we learned here then, I mean, a lot of us went on obviously to, be on school boards and all kinds of stuff. And we learned the skill set, which I so badly want our students today to learn, to listen to others and to hear a broad range of ideas and sort through them and have to defend them and respect that others, you could agree to disagree and still be civil.
Now, we know what the atmosphere is like in, the so-called real world outside of Carolina. I guess my question to the two people on faculty and staff is that the atmosphere on campus? I mean, can you listen? Can you speak and be listened to? Let me go to Veggie first, if I can, because I know that's what she teaches. So.
Yeah, I'd like to think that it can be, but I know that it's not in all classrooms and all spaces. And that's part of what we're working on, is figuring out how to have this kind of respectful conversation with one another, to not jump to conclusions just based on one viewpoint that a person has about other things that they might also believe or feel. It is a challenge. I think it's definitely a product of the current times that we're in. And the influence of social media. There's all kinds of things that I think are a little bit different now. But what I see as a hopeful point is that we recognize as educators that we have to do things a little bit differently to counter that. And so I think that's where I think it's really wonderful to see people embracing approaches that allow people to safely share their viewpoints, to be able to express themselves, and hopefully to celebrate the fact that we don't all think alike, and we shouldn't. That's not the point of being at universities.
Can I push you a little bit for some detail? What kinds of things are being done to allow people to feel more comfortable expressing themselves?
Yeah, so there's a variety of approaches. So one of the things that I work on is helping faculty to think about changing the way they facilitate, for example. That's a very simple thing that could be done to allow people to recognize that not everybody feels comfortable contributing to a classroom discussion, for example. But it doesn't mean that you can't have a productive conversation. There are ways to moderate a session that allow people to express their viewpoints. They could be written down, for example, and they can be shared across peers. They could be shared anonymously. We have polling technology now that allows students to write things on their phone, and then we can broadcast it in the classroom. So there are lots of ways to get ideas out in a room that don't involve, necessarily a brave person raising their hand to share their viewpoint. So those are the kinds of hands-on approaches and techniques. The other thing I'll say is we're taking a curricular approach to this too. We are launching a new general education curriculum in the fall.
What,
And
again?
part of
Sorry.
that- yeah, part of that curriculum is a course that I just am so thrilled about. It's a University 101 College Thriving course. And we do exactly what was mentioned on the panel. We talk about what is active listening? How does that work? We talk about, all kinds of sort of skills associated with succeeding in college. How do you do group work? How do you study? What resources are available on our campus? So really not assuming that students know how to find these things and can bump into them whenever it's needed, but to bake it into the course that they must take as a first-year student. So I'm really excited about that because that's one of those ways we eliminate a barrier, and that is the barrier of not having the knowledge about how to navigate a university as big as ours.
Got it. Thank you. Leah, you're the most recent arrival here, so I can't exactly to ask you what has changed in 50 years, but when you hear the description of what the campus was like, does it reflect what you think it's like now? What do you think has changed?
I'd say a lot has changed. I feel like we've taken, and this is college campuses across the nation have taken a step back, but part of it is social media, as you said, things that are happening in the world and how folks are treating each other. And our students bring that to campus. And this is where we then hit that wall of them having a sense of not feeling welcome in the classroom or heard. But we're trying to move that needle. So one of the things that we're doing is we're trying to introduce, and we will this fall, introduce training around dialogue. So not discourse, but dialogue, where we're not asking students to debate each other, but to listen, as Vijay said, actively. But we're also we're going to open up training for our faculty and staff, because we know that these are some difficult conversations that individuals are having in department meetings, in their school meetings, in the classroom. Students bring in the things that are happening in the real world into the classroom to have conversations about, and oftentimes what we're finding is that our faculty don't know how to have or facilitate a dialogue. And then it becomes contentious in the class. Folks leave feeling as if they don't belong, that they're not being heard, that they're being discriminated against or harassed. They file a complaint. And this is faculty, students, and staff, right? In staff meetings or in department meetings, literally debates have broken out to the point where folks aren't talking to each other. You can't carry on an institution that way where our faculty are not talking to each other in a department meeting. And so we're going to do some training around how to facilitate a dialogue, how to listen, how to help the students facilitate that dialogue in the classroom, not debate, not argue, not scream over each other or cancel each other out, but to listen. And also, we're trying to get them to understand the only way for you to form intellectual opinions on a variety of topics is that you have to listen, right? And if you're talking, you're not listening. And the same for our faculty members. If you're going to get your students to then grow and understand and to become the scholars that they can be, they've got to listen to each other. So we're pushing those programs. We will offer some open forums on difficult conversations that we need to know happen on this campus. We're also facilitating some of those in some of our schools, and they've been happening since the Nicole Hannah-Jones incident here. I wasn't here, but I came in at the end, and folks are still upset. And if you listen to the news, it's not going away. So we want to make a difference.
Ben, you look like you want to say something.
No, I was just going to say that you're right. We've got the students of today, because of social media and all, it's really tough to get their attention. So we got to figure out some way that we can reconnect, because we didn't have it back when we started. I mean, we had the pencil and the paper and really the ability to sit down and chat. But, the young people today, they're not socially engaged. And that's what we got to do, is get kids and individuals more socially engaged, I think.
Will everybody be required to take that new course, the 101, or good? That sounds wonderful. I tell you, if we could be known, can y'all hear me? My husband said you can't, so. Okay, well, I was working on.
She's using that mic. So.
Okay, I'll use, is this better?
Yeah.
if we can be the place where people can go and students graduating from here are good listeners, they're willing to work with others, they don't just attack and shut down, but believe in, I mean, I'm sure many of you, or lots of y'all, have served on lots of boards. I've served on boards where everybody's got an agenda. And I've served on boards where people come and everybody wants to work together. And you know you won't get all of what you want and they won't get all of what they want, but we craft something that works for everybody. And I think that sense of learning how to do that and work with others is just being lost. And I would love to think that Carolina could go to the level of teaching our students to listen. And if you radically disagree, that's okay. You're learning from why they think how they think. And it might tweak some of what you think. And, you know, I guess we all were more socially moderate back when than people are more polarized now. But I want our students to go into the world with the skill set of listening and being civil and talking to each other.
I'm looking at you, Pat.
Good luck. I think the culture has changed with young people. I taught for 30 years, and I saw a change, and it got very frustrating. Not that they were bad, they were just different. And it's a real sense of entitlement. I've got all kinds of stories. I won't go into them, but it's going to be very difficult to change young students, in my opinion. I don't know how you do it. Yes, you can require these things, you can require courses, but I don't think that making things required is going to change the way that they interact socially and do a lot of things. And it seems to me, based on things I've read, students are harassing other students more than getting it from the faculty. They're shutting each other down. And how are you going to stop that? I don't know. Here's a letter to UNC, a UNC student about how she went to freshman orientation. And one of the things that she was required to do was to say, now what pronouns do you want to be used in referring to you? And she thought, well, I don't want to do that. And this really got her upset. And she said, if the purpose of starting pronouns is to create a more open environment, why does that same atmosphere become cold and judgmental if you choose not to participate? Well, she was anathema to these other students. She wouldn't go along with that. And so she did not feel included. She felt ostracized. And she says, if I introduce myself based on how I identify, then why stop at pronouns? Why not sexuality, race, ethnicity, age group, socioeconomic ranking, relationship status, and the clubs I'm a member? I mean, and she was ostracized for having a different viewpoint. So that's going on right now. This is recent. So how do you change that? I have no clue.
The provost told me recently, Chris Clemens, that he had a young lady come to him and say she wanted to start a college Republicans club, and that her roommate went ballistic. Said, I will not room with somebody who does that. And he said he could not find anybody who would room with her, and now she ended up in a room by herself. That just shocked me. I mean, that would never have happened when we were here. But that's just very unfortunate that people feel that way. And another one's, I was also told on the back of a door in one of the cafeteria or the eating areas, there was Republicans are hateful people. I don't know, but again, I heard the same thing that Pat has, that it's more the students who are unkind to each other than the faculty.
So we can replace the political party, and I'm sure all of you knew it and have experienced it, because I experienced it when I went to college and when I went to work. Replace it with race. I won't room with a black person. my first or second job, I did counseling. And students could come for career advice and counseling, and they refused a black counselor. I don't want to see someone who's black. And so, yes, politics has now added on to the issues of who we won't engage with. And it's difficult. And as for the young woman who entered into the freshman class or orientation, that part is about training our facilitators, right? No one should have to give their pronouns because someone may be outed when they're not ready, right? They may not be ready to disclose who they really are or their identity. And so everyone should have a choice, but that comes back to good facilitation, right? Understanding how to work with a group, to facilitate the group, to make sure that every student in that group feels a sense of belonging.
So we've had politics come up a couple of times, and former Chancellor Meeser recently was quoted as saying, "Political interference has always been an issue. It's been in Carolina's history since the 18th century. What's new," he said, "is the fact that it's become extreme and highly partisan." So against that backdrop, I wonder what can really be done to change the climate on campus. It's not like the campus exists in we often talk about a bubble, but it doesn't exist in a bubble. So I'm wondering if, or do you think it doesn't need to, right? That's my question.
So I think, part of it is making sure that all of our administrators, faculty, staff have some training around some of these issues that is continuous. It's not a one-stop training, right? And then making sure that then we're imparting that information without bias to the students who attend Carolina, and I don't think that we're always doing that. I think we're missing it sometimes because some of us hold beliefs that we don't want to let go of. And we get that, but, as we enter the classroom, in some ways, we have to be impartial and unbiased. And recognize our bias when it crops up, and how do we address that? But also then encouraging our students and helping them to understand bias and how it interrupts the educational process, the hiring process, all of the things, the development of policies and systems, and changes the culture and the viewpoint on our campus. And so we've got to do a better job of working with everyone across campus, but it takes time.
Okay, but I'm going to push you a little bit, because what I'm hearing, and we're kind of dancing around, truthfully, is that we have a couple of people on the panel who think that conservative views are not welcome on this campus. Let's just say it out loud. I don't think I'm misrepresenting your opinions. And there just isn't a place for people who have conservative opinions, conservative political views. Is that the case? Do you think that there is not enough conservative conversation around the University of North Carolina?
There's plenty, and all you have to do is look at our board of trustees, our board of governors, the legislature across the state of North Carolina. There's a ton of conservative views, and so some would argue that that is the interruption to the educational process here at Carolina.
The external
The
pressure.
conservative
Yeah.
view,
Go ahead,
yes,
Ben.
the pressure.
But that's from the top, but you got the student down here, and they're coming from, I think, a different perspective, that things are so partisan. I'm a political figure. I'm a county legislator in Westchester County, so I know politics raw firsthand. We have a tremendous divide that I didn't experience when I was here. I was trying to get an education. I came from nothing. I had nothing. And it's like, hey, you either stay here or you go back on the farm. So I knew what my options were, and I got through it and all. But there's always been conservative issues here. For example, my first 2 hours were very traumatic on this campus. I walked in, met my white roommate from Wilmington. My parents took me to pay bills. You could pay bills back then in '68. I came back after getting lunch. The only clothes in that room were mine. My white roommate had moved out in August of '68. And my parents looked at me and I looked at them and said, it's going to be a long 4 years. So, we understood the issues then. But but we can have dialogue about it. But right now, we can't have the dialogue.
Right. You know, when you see data like that, 16 departments here do not have any conservatives, registered voters, conservatives, and they're, what was it, 16 departments, and that it's, Pat, what was the other ratio besides the 16?
Well, it's 12-1 Democrats to Republican on the UNC campus.
And there's a
In what universe? Are we talking faculty,
Professor-
staff?
Faculty.
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 And
yeah,
so there's a
sorry.
perception of that. And I think in academic life in general, people think they tend to be a little bit more liberal than like business people, perhaps. But we hear it's more the students, how the students treat each other. And I guess I'd like to know, I remember when Sue Kitchin came here as Vice Chancellor of Student Affairs in early 2000, Doug, was that about when? She said, no, it was Peggy Jablonski, was going to drop out of working for a university. She had come from Brown, and she came for an interview, and she said, students at Brown were in my face, and if they could make people in administration cry, they thought they had succeeded. She said, I came to this campus, and if the students disagreed with me, they were respectful, and they said, I don't mean to be disrespectful in disagreeing or whatnot. She said, I didn't know there were still people like that. And this was in the early 2000s.
Wondered, yeah.
Was already happening up north, no offense.
Well, I'm from Eastern North Carolina.
Right, right. But she said, people were respectful. Kids did not get in your face and scream and holler. And I hate that culture has invaded us now, because I want us to be better than that. And I want our kids to leave here, and I don't know how you do it. I have no answers.
Well, let me ask Veggie, because she's in the classroom, right? You're teaching students all the time. Is that your sense of the atmosphere in the classroom and on the campus?
No, it's not contentious like that. And if you think about it, the vast majority of subjects we teach, a lot of them involve politics, but not all of them. And certainly my viewpoint, I teach statistics, I teach research methods. These are very skills-oriented classes. There's really very little conversation around politics. And I think one thing that, and it's not to say it doesn't color the way we view the world, and as does any other form of identity we identify with. I think there are so many things that we don't have right in terms of thinking about representation. So I'll just point out the fact that we have so few faculty of color on our campus. And you think about the state of North Carolina and the students that we serve, we're nowhere near where we should be. And why is it a revolving door? Why are people coming and not staying? The issues that you mentioned early on, we need to ask ourselves these questions about what are we doing to support the faculty when they arrive? Because just like our students, we should want them to succeed and to thrive here. And if they are not, then we need to really turn the mirror around on ourselves and say, what's happening here that people are leaving? And not just say, oh, it's just, they had a better offer, or they did this, or they did that. Like, let's examine the water and see what is going on that people aren't feeling like they should stay.
That's a very fair question. What is being done about that, Leah? Are those questions being asked, and are you collecting that kind of information?
Yeah, so we're looking at the data metrics around who's leaving, right? Why they're leaving. So now there are exit interviews. I think before there were very few exit interviews for folks to figure out why they were leaving. We're looking at, are we doing some inclusive hiring, right? And we know that's where it begins as to who we're recruiting and who we're hiring and how we're doing the hiring, right? And so that's important, and that explains in many ways why Carolina is not as diverse as it could be in terms of our faculty and our staff. I think very little, I would say, and I'm not in the classroom, but from the students that I hear, they're not having as much controversy in the classroom as they are outside the classroom. And most of it is not necessarily around politics, but around all the other identity issues that happen on this campus. So looking at race, looking at religion, looking at ableism, looking at identity, all of those things crop up consistently here, and that's where students start to then have these issues and want to speak up and want to be heard. And I think that's the part, is that many of them feel like they're not being heard because some of the things haven't changed, right? I'm sure you all read in the paper that there was a disabled student who was housed on the 5th floor and was stuck there for 36 hours, right? That student felt like they weren't being heard. And if you were a parent of that student, you would feel like they weren't being heard, right? So.
It really comes down, for me, what is the purpose of this university? Are we trying to cure all the social ills of society? This, to me, is a place for academics, for scholarship and learning. And sometimes we have to overcome some real barriers. Ben is a great example. I mean, if you didn't have a place where you could go, a safe place, you didn't have anyone that you, Leah Cox, to set up programs to help you, do you feel like you're a better person for that? Because you did it on your own? You made independent judgment?
Well, I mean, yeah. I mean, what happened is that, you've got to figure out how to survive in the atmosphere and in the environment that you're in. We had, if you all remember Herb Davis, who was in admissions. That was who we turned to at that point in time. Herb is long retired, but he was wonderful. But there were very few people. I don't remember having any professor that was of color. It didn't exist back then. At least I didn't. I mean, maybe some of the in African American, I did studies. We did have a couple.
Remember Blyden Jackson? Yeah.
So can I just answer?
Please. Yeah.
And
sure.
Pat has a great point, but here's what I would say. Why would we ask students to just survive, right? If you don't have to just survive, why are we asking folks who may look different or feel different or see things differently than you to just survive? Which means that they're spending a lot of time in that survival mode and not getting the education that they could have or the ability to participate. As I look at Ben, and as he told the story of arriving back to his room and then being there by himself, right? I don't even want to imagine how that makes you feel, but then you are looking around at what should be your peers every day thinking, is it that person who left me? Is it that person who doesn't like me? If I speak up, are they going to say something to... That's a survival mode that none of us should have to deal with when we're at an institution of higher learning.
All right, I'll go.
And that doesn't always make you a better person, right? If you survive, it's like going to war. Are you a better person because you survived, but you saw all your friends get killed around you? That doesn't make you a better person.
Which we did. It's the real world, too. We
Absolutely.
had family, friends, close people die, come back, still having problems from the Vietnam War. That's the real world. That's out there. That's once we get out of the university. When again, back to a freshman. My late wife was a freshman in the class of our same class. Spencer dorm, 3 women in a room made for one. Okay. You remember the rules the women had back then?
Very
had
well.
To sign in and out and get your parents. I'm a male. I could do whatever I wanted to. She got called down, had to go see Kitty Carmichael. Public display of affection because we were holding hands in the parlor at Spencer dorm. Okay. All right. We dealt with it. I don't know. Things have changed. I mean, that's not that big a deal, but it was part of life back then. And things have changed for women. Thank goodness. We had to go to the Arboretum.
Yeah, it got
That's another
crowded in there, didn't it?
I had an Arb kit, I called it. Well, never mind. We'll go on.
So I guess I'm wondering, are you saying that you think the university is, I'm using this word, there may be others, is coddling students by trying to make it easier for them?
It was in loco parentis back then, and I feel that many of these things, yes. The short answer is yes.
Currently?
Yes.
Okay, all right.
Doug, remember at our 40th reunion that Charlie Scott got up and what he said to us? Would you feel comfortable sharing that? Will you talk? Or are you?
Oh, we need a microphone.
Oh, did he speak last night?
I missed Charlie.
Okay, I wasn't here, but.
I think most people who were here last night and heard Charles Ingram, who's our class president, speak about how Charles's remarks at our reunion impacted him. And Charles spoke, but he spoke before Charles Ingram. So essentially what Charles Ingram was recalling, and what you're probably recalling, is that Charles was a basketball player here, but he did not feel that he belonged.
But then he went on to say that he didn't give us a chance. He said,
Well, he also said that, I don't recall him saying he didn't give us a chance, but because he was in St. Anthony's Hall, so he tried the fraternity route for a while. He pointed out last night that both his son and daughter came to Carolina, and they made up for all of the experiences he didn't have.
right,
Because they thoroughly enjoyed their experiences at Carolina.
uh-huh. Okay, well, and what I kind of heard was that he stayed unto himself because he didn't feel like he could get involved, but in retrospect, he was regretting a little bit that he hadn't, kind of found the niche of kind of letting more people in. So that,
Again, I mean, as Leah just said, it's all on him, right? It would all be on him to do that.
well, no,
What is the role the rest of us need to
I
play?
mean, I think he just gravitated to Dean Smith, because that was kind of his safe zone where he was when he was here. But my point is, he had some of the similar experiences
Right.
that Ben had.
I would venture to guess that many black students had a similar experience. I remember being on a tapping and going to tap one of my good friends who lived in Carborough off campus, and it was for the Valkyries. And when you tapped for the Valkyries, you wore a hood. I don't know if y'all remember this, but yep, And so we're driving to Carborough, and we're going to go to her apartment building. It's like, I don't think we should be doing this. Like, she's not supposed to know who's tapping her, but we don't care. We are not wearing hoods into her apartment building in Carborough. And, thank goodness, she didn't tell that we outed ourselves to her. But, we had to be aware of these things then. And, maybe they don't wear hoods anymore. I hope they don't. It was not a pleasant experience all around. Pardon? Yes, traumatizing. That's true. We can talk about that later. So we're almost to the point where we want to hear more questions from you. We've gotten it started with a little contribution from our alumni director, and I see Mr. Daggett, surprisingly enough, is ready to ask a question. So could we get a mic over there to Chris? Thank you.
Thank you. Good morning, everybody. Chris Stagg at Class of 72. We've talked a lot about, in fact, from the opening comments, were the days of being disagreeing without being disagreeable. To what do you attribute the shift?
I think parents are coddling their kids too much. I think things shifted. We were the product of parents who had depression and worked, grew up during depression, or their parents did, and they worked hard and whatnot. And I mean, the thought when I came here, if I told my dad I'm going to come home and hang out with you when I graduate, I mean, he'd have just, what? I mean, there were expectations on us, and we had hard times. We had struggles, certainly different types of struggles, but we just were brought up with a skill set that if you're sad, okay, you work through it, and I'll talk to you and whatnot and help you. But it was a very different time. My next door neighbor raced up to Appalachian from Rocky Mount because her daughter broke up with her boyfriend. I mean, my thought was, what? Although then I thought, kids are committing suicide now.
Exactly.
And another really good friend of my son's called him and said, we were home during COVID, we were social drinkers, and now she almost died because they started drinking more. I mean, I think there's so many things going on in society, but I do think parents and Dr. Cox, having safe spaces, I mean, the thought that we would have a place where we could go and be sad or whatnot, I mean, those just didn't exist back then. So I think it's a different way kids are being brought up. Somebody said the kids today are everybody gets a trophy kids. Yeah. And to a certain extent, I mean, I saw that when my kids were growing up. Kids would be crying because they didn't get a trophy. Well, I mean, sometimes we won, sometimes we lost, but our parents said that's just, they role model that there are good times and there are bad times, and I think we had more coping skills and were forced to develop them lovingly more than kids today have. And of course, we didn't live through COVID and, being stuck at home and you can't socialize and you can't do stuff that, I mean, we can't even fathom what that would have done, what that really did down the road would have done to our young people.
Veggie, you're in the classroom now. What would you attribute this what we're hearing as a real change in the climate?
I have a slightly different viewpoint. I think about my time at Carolina. I had the privilege of being a college student, and that was pretty much all I did was focus on college and studying. And I see so many of my students holding not just one job, but a couple jobs, some of them through the night, and have extracurriculars. Sometimes when I have conversations with students at office hours, I think there's no way I could have gotten into Carolina looking at the caliber of students I interact with now. The sort of, just the drive that they have and that they've succeeded to get into the doors at Carolina, it's just remarkable. I know it's easy to say that they don't pay attention or they're not engaged, but I guess I just see it differently. I see they work really hard, and so, yes, sometimes things don't go their way, and they certainly don't always cope in the most productive or helpful ways. But I think in general they're very resilient. The students that I encounter, they have a ton of grit. They are just remarkable people, and for me it's just a privilege to interact with them, to know that I might be able to help them in their endeavors, and so I guess I just see it a little bit differently interacting with students.
We need to get you a microphone so that BG can, but well, no, she can't hear without a microphone, and as it turns out, the power of the mic is over there, so go right ahead, and then we'll get it to you.
Joel Rathbone, class of 72. I've heard a lot of discussion. I haven't heard a lot of thoughts in terms of what directions to go. So I thought I'd offer one. And I learned this from my 16-year-old granddaughter. She got involved in social media discussions with other girls. No one is teaching them how to communicate with social media. And in fact, there have been plenty of studies that show social media can only convey 25% of what a face-to-face communication can do. And if you're only communicating at a level of 25%, you better do it well. And yet, I can't find a class. No one can tell me how to do Facebook. I have to learn it by myself. These kids have grown up learning it by themselves. They are isolated and they are alone, even though they're with print and even though there's, quote, discussion. It's just different. And someone needs to focus on that at an early level and a late level. So, I mean, when the college kids come in, wouldn't hurt to teach them what social media really is and how to communicate the best methodology so that they don't get in trouble, because they do.
So do grown-ups get in trouble on social media. In fact, I don't think there are any college students on Facebook anymore. Am I right? They've all left, right? It's just grandmas, like me, who are on Facebook going, "Won't you post a picture of the grandson?" Anyway, go ahead with your question.
Hi, I'm Bob Mannequin, class of 70. Nice to see you, Gene. I was in ROTC for 4 years, from 66 to 70. Mm-hmm. Wisconsin blew up their building. Kent State burned down their building. and Tulane's building burned down. That never happened here. No one ever spit on me the 2 days a week that I was walking across campus in uniform, because there was an expectation of values that this doesn't happen at Carolina. We respect each other. We may disagree with each other. We may stand in amazement and wonder why a group of people really care that Saga is taking over the food and people are going to get a significantly different wage and package. We had big court, we had all of that. But at the end of the day, nobody spit on anybody else. People disagreed because that was the value that the institution placed on civility. And my question is, understanding, Professor, that this is an incredibly bright, incredibly talented, incredibly hardworking group of people, and if you didn't think you would get in, rest assured that I never would have gotten in.
Same.
What are we doing with regard to establishing values of what is expected, or what this university stands? This university has always been a little bit, an outlier in this state, but it has never been a target, as it seems to have become from a political point of view. But I guess with regard to being disagree without being disagreeable, I'd be curious to know where we are with the values of the institution, what we stand for, and what we can transmit to students, faculty, and staff. Not talking about the purpose. I'm talking about the values.
I think you were looking at Vigi, so maybe we should give her a chance to respond, but then Leah, if you want to jump in, or if you want to punt to Leah, that's okay too.
I'll let Leah start.
Okay then.
She's going to let you start.
Thanks, Vigi.
Thanks.
And so just remember that I am the new timer here. And I have not lived through an orientation of our students yet, but I do know that at multiple events and speeches and conversations, folks talk about the value of Carolina and it's, just having been here a short time, I've recognized that it is definitely a different institution in terms of the love that folks have for Carolina and how much they value who you are, what you stand for, your ability to engage, to support one another. So it's really just amazing, and how much the alums and our students love Carolina. It's like no place I've ever been. And it doesn't matter whether you're in the state or you meet someone. I met someone in the airport, and the minute they heard I worked at UNC, I became their friend. And it is just a value of the folks that actually move through Carolina. And it's beautiful, actually. So I get that you're saying, are we pushing the values? I think that they are, but I think I haven't been here long enough to see how in the ways that we're doing that.
We have a number of people who want to ask questions. Where is the microphone? Oh, I see. It's already been given away. Okay, I see all of you, and we'll get to you. Go ahead.
I'm curious of the panel members how you view the impact of iPhones, and maybe this has been discussed already. I got here late, but the impact of iPhones and social media on the kids. As I walked in here from where I parked, I would say half the students were walking, looking at their iPhone. So I'm just curious about what your assessment of that is and its long-range impact. My grandchildren, I have 5, and they're all addicted to their phones. So,
should we have true confessions about how many adults in this room walk while? Yeah, me too. But yes, I mean, clearly it's different. I think, Vigi, without elaborating too much, you talked about how these phones actually are a useful tool in teaching as well. I'm sorry, we do have other people that I have recognized. Okay.
I had my hand up.
Okay, all right. So if anybody wants to jump in on the iPhone thing, feel free. We have a lot of questions pending.
Well, social media just allows people to anonymously be ugly. And I think that's just a terrible thing. I mean, I've thought about, ran for office a couple times, and was on the school board and whatnot, I never thought that somebody would malign my character and my children and threaten my husband and whatnot. I mean, it's just opened the floodgates for people to be really a license to be awful.
And I think grown-ups are doing that, is what I'm getting at. I think that's happening because grown-ups are doing it. Go ahead, sir.
Hi, Debbie. Buck Goldstein, how are you?
Good.
to
How are
see you. So I've been teaching here now for 17 years and taught a class of 420 students in the genomics building not far from here called Introduction to Entrepreneurship. I teach a class with the chancellor and work very closely with certain members of the panel. And I don't recognize the students that you all are talking about. I mean, and I teach 420 at a time. And more often than not, I'm learning from them a lot more than they're learning from me. And if you're talking about values, the people who are really standing up for values right now are students. And the faculty are kind of following along, much as they did when we were in school and opposing the war, and the faculty were following along. I don't think things have changed nearly as much. I mean, there is phones and stuff like that, but it just feels like we're sitting in a room with our parents or our grandparents, and it's like, hey, dudes, the world has changed. And I would argue the world's changed for the better.
Thank you. Buck, can you pass the phone straight over to Kelly there? Right here. Sorry. Reach your hand. There you go.
Kelly Alexander, class of 70. I got a couple of things I want to kind of riff on. You know, first, I was here as a student when Blyden Jackson was hired, and he integrated the faculty in the English department. What's important about that in my memory is that was the first time I had been exposed to an African-American instructor in the 4 years that, almost 4 years up to that point. And I walked into the class, and Dr. Jackson scared the bejesus out of everybody in there because he was tough.
He was.
And he was a critic. And I felt real good about being in the class with him. And I felt good because everybody else in there needed the credits. I didn't. I was actually in the class because I had wanted to learn more about African American literature, grades be you know what. And I was stupid enough to actually tell him that. And if any of you remember Dr. Jackson, you would understand that when he started, when I told him that, he became almost as pale as a sheet. Because I don't think any other student had ever just said to him, you can't scare me. And we went on to become really good friends, and I learned a tremendous amount because I had dared to do something different. Carolina didn't teach me about free speech. It reinforced what I had already picked up and learned from my family about the importance of speaking your mind. I listen to people talk about how we have to engineer classes in such a way that nobody feels left out. Well, what I used to do was to camp out on the front row of a class in front of the professor, and if there was something going on that I didn't understand, I simply would speak out. And either the guy ignored me or engaged with me. And one day in a history class, I turned around and I looked at everybody else in the class, and I realized that there was one group of folks that tended to like to sit in the back of the class, and it was almost like their thing was to hide. And there was another group of folk who kind of did the intermediate thing, but then there were the idiots like me that were on the front row and who on purpose wanted to engage and wanted the professor to be able to differentiate, who you were. I think what I'm trying to get at is mindset. I don't know where that got taught, but I know that this place helped to reinforce it. And I know that some of the things that the panel has been talking about seems to me have always been an aspect of Carolina. There have always been conservatives in Carolina. There have always been liberals. And I sat here and I said to myself, did I ever ask a professor what his political party was? And the answer is no, I never did. I knew what a lot of professors thought about very specific issues, but I didn't know if they were registered Democrats or Republicans. Mm-hmm. I know that when I got to the campus, we still had something called campus political parties that vaguely tracked Democrats and Republicans. I know that later on, I discovered that a lot of my friends were folks that you would consider to be conservatives these days, and some of my friends were considered to be, Che Guevara rebels, but they were all my friends, and we all got along. We also engaged in something that I think is missing these days, and that's called talk. We actually sat around and we would talk. And we would, I was at one point thought about following my friend over here into the ROTC. And what happened was the ROTC folks said, you need to be at a particular place at a particular time. The orientation people said you need to be at the same place, at a different place at the same time. And so I inquired at the ROTC meeting about what I should do. And when the ROTC folks said follow orders, end of discussion, I said, okay.
I'm off to orientation.
Yeah. And, I kind of the last thing that I want to bring forward is that my time at Carolina taught me that students lead. Students don't always follow. Students lead. I, along with 2 or 3 other students, we started something called Project Uplift. That's over 50 years ago. It's still going strong. And in fact, it is going to the point that it is wildly bigger, more successful than anything that we imagined it would be. But one of the most important things about it is that 50 years ago, we figured out how to make affirmative action work without calling it affirmative action. And it's real simple. The university was supposed to be here to service all of the people of North Carolina. Well, we actually believed what it said. And because we believed what it said, we believed in that core mission, we got together and we convinced other students to support it. We talked to people on the faculty about supporting it. And we even went out to foundations to talk to them about supporting it. and we figured out how to build a student-led, basically student-financed, student-conceived institution that's still running. Now, whatever it is that gave all of us the ability to do that, to come together and get something like that going, that's the essence of Carolina in my mind. And if it's missing in action today, we need to get it back. And if it's not missing in action, we need to figure out how to harness it. Never give a politician a microphone.
Especially, we're running out of time. We really
So-
are. But I'm glad you contributed, Kelly. Thank you. And there were a couple other questions. I know if we can do, can this be really, really short?
Yes, my name is Pat Morgan. I'm the class of '62. I came here and joined the fraternity. A friend of mine, a Smithfield boy, they showed the Confederate flag. After about 3 years at symposium, I sat and listened to a panel. Floyd McKissick was on it, the Kirkpatrick from the Richmond paper, and McNeil Smith. And Floyd McKissick talked about how he was mistreated by the police in Asheville. And that was quite something to me. I hope that this is still a place where eyes are opened. I went on and served in the Peace Corps. I was one of the first undergraduates to do that.
Thank you so much. Well, I'm getting we're really done. We're really out of time. So what I'm going to say is that we should thank our panel. And Vijay, thank you for being with us by long distance. And many of us are going to be walking over to what the inappropriately titled Old Students Lunch. I mean, I don't know who they're talking about. But we can talk to each other on the way. So thank you very much for coming.
Thank you, Deborah.
Appreciate it.
I was at Broughton, and I remember when they integrated, and I was.
Oh, thank you.